our hands before we approach the exchange between Pilate and Jesus. And we need to take a short reading from 1 Corinthians chapter 2. Paul says this: "When I came to you, brethren, I didn't come with superiority of speech or wisdom, proclaiming to you the testimony of God. I determined to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and Him crucified. And I was with you in weakness and in fear and in much trembling, and my message and my preaching were not in persuasive words of wisdom, but in a demonstration of the Spirit and of power, that your faith should not rest on the wisdom of men, but on the power of God." So the first thing he's saying is he preaches Christ as crucified, that is, in his weakness. This is God. This is a crucified God he's preaching. And he says it's stupidity to Greeks and it's absolutely offensive to Jews. But he said, you believed it. And he's reminding them. The reason he needs to remind them, he says, is because they've begun to exalt the servants of God. And that's just carnality. As soon as you exalt the servants of God, you end up in that terrible mess. So he said, I didn't come to you with persuasive words. You couldn't say, oh, Paul's a great preacher. That's not what he was saying. But he goes on to say this: "Yet we do speak wisdom among those who are mature." Perfect is the old text of the King James Version. Among the perfect, among the mature, people who've come to a goal. "It's a wisdom, however, not of this age, nor the rulers of this age who are passing away. We speak God's wisdom in a mystery, the hidden wisdom which God predestined before the ages to our glory." And then he adds this: "The wisdom which none of the rulers of this age has understood. For if they had understood it, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory." You need to know that. What if Pilate had released him? He certainly wanted to, and he never condemned him. So we need to ask a question there. There's another piece of information you need, which is, do you remember, it's recorded in the prophet Daniel that there is a man, or more importantly, a very highly placed angel called Michael, who fights for Israel. And Michael is engaged in a very difficult problem because there's a prince of the power of Greece that is coming. And we have now this connection that there is a powerful connection between the authorities upon the earth and the angelic authorities, which in some way mirror them, or in fact are them. We'll have to wait to see how we manage that. But what is clear is that Michael he was away fighting this particular angel because he was in fact anticipating something with regard to Greece and of course later to Rome. And the issue that Michael picks up is there's something happening in the heavenlies, and Paul will tell us that when he tells us in Galatians. He'll insist that, and also in Ephesians, he says that we are wrestling with principalities and powers and kingdoms and high ones, archai he calls them, rulers, and he insists that there is this deep connection. You need to hold that in your mind when we come to this. Pilate goes out to meet the Jews because this is Passover night, according to our writer. Not the night before, but John's insisting Christ is the Passover lamb, and we shall come to see that Paul has the same thinking. Remember, he says that Christ our Passover has been sacrificed for us. Let us therefore keep the feast, not with the old leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. Christ is the Passover lamb, not an anticipation of it. And in this gospel, very clearly so. So these Jews are not going to enter a Roman praetorium. He goes out to meet them. He understands that. He's a cultural leader and he comprehends the issue. Pilate went out to them and he said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" So he's really saying, tell me the charges. What are the charges? Why are you bringing this man? And they answered and said, if this man were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him up to you. Which of course answers nothing at all, and says, trust us, we're bringing you someone we really think is deserving of death, because that turns out to be the decisive issue. You can't kill him. Only the Romans can. And this, Pilate screws them hard about and mocks them terribly later. At the moment, he's open. Tell me the charges. Pilate said, take him yourselves then. This is a pushback. This is simply saying, if you're not going to tell me what the charges are, you go judge him yourself. So he says, take him yourselves and judge him according to your law. Now this is an understanding that Roman law is the one that's decisive here, but your law is some little piddling law that can just, go and do your own thing and figure it out. This is a very strong political push. You need to understand this. This is political all the way down the line. However, it's not. There's something else running. The Jews said to him, we are not permitted to put anyone to death. He's pushed the screw so hard. They've now come out in the open to say, our law can't go this direction. We can't kill anyone. You guys can. We need a killing thing here, and we haven't got that. So he's put them in their place. He's basically said, yes, we're Rome here. Rome rules. Get it right. That the word of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spoke, signifying by what kind of death he was about to die. John understands not the issue that they cannot kill, but that the only way Romans kill and punish is on a cross, lifted up. So John doesn't pick up the political issue or the pushback. He picks up the decisive thing that Jesus said, if you lift up the Son of Man, then you will discover certain things. Now we've already seen that, haven't we, in chapter 3 with Nicodemus. If the Son of Man is lifted up, well then you can trust him as the one who will deal with the wrath of God and turn it away, and you'll be healed. Chapter 3. But we've heard this more when Jesus talks about now the hour has come and the Son of Man is to be lifted up. They say, who is the Son of Man? And do you remember that was way back in chapter 12? And now John is telling you for the third time the important issue of being lifted up. And of course, we've already seen that there is an Old Testament picture there of the baker and the butler. You can be lifted up to glory and be reinstated with the glory which he had before the world was made, or you can be lifted up to die, or both. And both can do the same thing. Yes. Now this is where we're heading. Notice that this is portrayed by John as an in, out, in, out, in, out. Pilate goes out. Now he turns away and he leaves them and he goes in. And this is the private conversation between Jesus and, in this case, the authorised authority. Pilate then entered again into the praetorium and summoned Jesus and he said to him, are you the king of the Jews? Now this is a question which breaks new ground in John's revelation. People wanted to make him a king and he passed through them. Do you remember that particular section? We haven't heard King of the Jews. Are you King of the Jews? Jesus said, well, are you saying this on your own initiative, or does others tell you this about me? He's searching for the question, is this your question? Or is it something planted by others? Pilate said, I'm not a Jew, am I? Meaning, couldn't care less. I'm not fussed about a king of the Jews. I'm not a Jew, am I? Meaning, it isn't my question. Your own nation and the chief priests delivered you up to me. What have you done? Now, John the writer is making it really clear who are the people who've delivered him up. Later we'll hear that Pilate does deliver him over to be crucified. This word delivering is important because Judas delivers him. There's a powerful theologian of a modern day who tells us that Judas did complete his apostolic understanding. The apostles delivered Jesus in their preaching. They delivered him as the saviour of the world. Judas did too, but he delivered him up to the Romans. But what's important to see here is that he's saying this: your own nation. In Pilate's mouth, John has made very clear for us that this is under a handing over by his nation. But to whom? To a pagan base. Now we're into much deeper things. Now we're into an amalgam of Jews and Gentiles. And Jesus says, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would be fighting. In other words, if I was a king with a kingdom in this world, you'd be up against my soldiers, my friend. There would be an insurrection on. There'd be something politically obvious to you. Come. My kingdom is not of this world, but I am a king. He makes that clear. When my servants would be fighting, but that I might not be delivered up to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm. In other words, he says, if I were a king, my servants would fight that I wouldn't be delivered up to the Jews. Not to Rome, to the Jews. You think, oh my goodness, he's thinking of a kingdom which is going to, if it were of this world, would prevent him from this rejection and handing back to the Jews to be delivered into something that they want. He's actually saying, I need protection from my own people. That's the issue. And at this point, something overwhelming appears. Pilate says to him, so you are a king? And Jesus says, you say that correctly, I am a king. And for this I've been born, and for this I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. That is, I'm a king who came to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth, hears my voice. Now this, of course, you remember this. He's been saying this for a long time, and you've understood that. He did it with the Pharisees, he did it with the Jews, and he's done it now with his disciples. If you hear my voice, you're of the truth, because you couldn't hear my voice as truth if you were not of the truth, if it had not been Father's gift to you. And he's saying to Pilate, anyone who hears my voice and knows the truth hears my voice. I'm heard by that. What does this mean then? Is he saying to Pilate something like, you're not hearing me? No, I think not. He's saying something that's consistent with the whole of this gospel. John the writer is putting into the mouth of Jesus here a statement which is telling us, everything I've been saying up to this point, I have come as a king of my own people to say the truth my Father gave me to say, so that they would come to know my Father through me, and they would not. But I haven't got an army, and I haven't got defenders, and sadly I need defending from my own people. Pilate said to him, what is truth? The state has no interest in truth, because it shouldn't, for reasons we shall begin to see. What I want to suggest to you is a couple of things here you want to be very sure about. When you look at the New Testament teaching about the church and the state, you immediately go to Romans 13. Let everyone be subject to the governing authority, because there is no authority except that which is from God, and you need to yield to the governing authorities. And that's true until you come to a place where the authority starts to persecute the Christian church, and then the Christians have a great deal of difficulty indeed. And by the time of Constantine, it's all blown away, and it's all ease, and it's all pleasure and ease and light, which is probably the most foolish thing that ever happened. But what's important for us to understand here is, in this case, what does Pilate represent? Well, later we shall see that he represents an authorised power. Because he says to Jesus later, I can crucify you, or I can release you. I have power to do that. And Jesus does not question that for a minute. He says, you have, but only because it's been given you. In other words, he honours the state, but what we're going to see is that this state has become demonised. It's actually working off an angelic rebellion, and we shall see how it works. Pilate says, what is truth? When they'd said this, he went out again. So that's the end of an in. Now we're going to an out. And when he goes out again to the Jews, he says to them, I find no guilt in him. Now this is an important issue, because Pilate, in this gospel and in Matthew, Mark and Luke, never, ever condemns Jesus. He justifies him. He says he's right. It's good. There's no guilt here. No charge. Won't have it. He never, ever, in word, ever says, this man deserves something. He doesn't have that at all. What would it mean if the power, the authority of the day justifies Jesus Christ? Because we're going to see that God himself will justify Jesus Christ by raising him from the dead, a man who never should ever have yielded to death, and certainly not on the basis of his own. He did yield to death because he had a cup to drink, which we agreed on. John 10. I have authority to lay it down, but authority to pick it up again. Now we want to be understanding that, because Pilate justifies Jesus and never says he is to be condemned. He won't in the end be able to save him, but that's because he himself has got an issue, which we'll come to see. I find no guilt in him, but I have a custom that I should release someone for you at the Passover. Do you wish that I release for you the King of the Jews? In other words, he had a sop in his hand here. He could say to them, look, I'm in a kind mood. Your charges are nothing. There's no Roman trial going on here at all. Not having it. But I will release to you someone. Would you like me to back release this? This is a stupid question. Can you see why? They've brought the man in order that he may be condemned. He says there is no condemnation I can give, but I'll hand him back to you. Would you like that? Meaning, let's just forget it. Let's wash it. It never happened. You could have him back. But I'm not having a Roman trial here. Shall I hand you back the King of the Jews? See how this is the main centre all the way through this particular exchange? And they said, not this man, Barabbas maybe. And then John says, no, Barabbas was a robber. And you know Matthew, Mark and Luke. And he was crucified between two robbers. Hello. Barabbas is a robber actually of the rebel kind. Do you remember we looked at that? There are kleptases and there are leptists in Greek. A robber who robs you secretly and gets into your house, and a robber who takes you by overpowering you and robbing you. This is the second sort. Barabbas is, what would you say? There's a word for that. It's not grievous bodily harm, something else, but it will come to me. It's robbery by force, that idea. So he offers to cool it. He offers to actually, let's not do this, because I'm not going to have a trial. And they don't do that. They want Barabbas. Pilate, therefore, took Jesus, so he comes back in, and he scourged him. And the soldiers wove a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they arrayed him in a purple robe, and they began to come up to him saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" and to give him blows in the face. So this mockery, this outside inside, we've now gone inside, and Rome is mocking the King of the Jews. That won't surprise us. Pilate has been mocking these Jews from the first time they appeared. And this is the place where the Roman power is actually saying to a power they dominate, You've got a king. Well, and so the Roman soldiers are in the spirit of the game. They understand that. They give him blows. Pilate came out again, went out again, and out and said to them, I'm bringing him out to you that you may know that I find no guilt in him. Meaning, I am not taking him to a due process. There's no trial here. I'll bring him out to you again. Does he bring Barabbas out? We're not told, but he brings him out. And he brings him out, alas, covered in a robe, a purple robe, pretty bloody by now, and he's in a place where he brings him out and he says, behold, I'm bringing him out to you that you may know that I find no guilt in him. So bringing him out says he's free to go. He's free. And Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, and he said, behold the man. And when the chief priests and officers saw him, and they cried out, crucify, crucify. Pilate said to them, take him yourselves and crucify him. I find no guilt in him. Notice he said that now 4 times. I find no guilt in him. You should go do it then. Meaning, you haven't got a hope of doing that, have you? See, he's happy to tell them to go do that because they have no authority to do that. The minute they do that, he jumps on them. So this is a power play. He's actually saying, you take him and crucify him yourself. If you're so excited about crucifixion, you go get that. Why are they so excited about crucifixion? John says, because he needs to be lifted up. There's a thing happening here. There's something happening here that's Old Testament and is to be fulfilled, and it needs to happen. And it's a cup, and it's a thing. All those things are coming together for you now. And our writer is making this clear to us. He says, you take him yourselves. The Jew says, we have a law, and by that law he ought to die because he made himself out to be the Son of God. Da 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 da. This is the place, Wes, where our man says, oh my goodness, that's a different thing. Kings of the Jews, we can mock. That's a piece of cake. We roll them any time with our forces. But there's a man who says Son of God. Now you and I both know that Pilate's wife had a dream, but it's not brought forward here. Pilate heard this statement and he was more afraid. Wow, we're now moving to fear. This man has got a fear of any man who's calling himself Son of God. He entered the praetorium again. He said to Jesus, where are you from? It's a loose game. It's a quiet leading question. It solicits something. Jesus gave him no answer at all. Wouldn't give it to him. But this, of course, is the central question which the fourth gospel has had in its mind all the time. Where does he come from? Remember the Jews said that. We don't even know where this man comes from. He's from God. He's from heaven. He's the man from heaven. He's the Son of the Father, sent by the whole centre of this gospel is turning on, where do you come from? And Pilate's asking the right question, and right at the centre of this exchange for the in and the out, what's happening is that this private conversation is now moving to the most important question, and he doesn't say a word. He will not tell this pagan man where he comes from. He will not. And so Pilate's appalled by that, because he now says, do you not know you won't speak to me? Now, when you speak when you're spoken to a Roman procurator, that's just understood. He says, you won't speak to me. Do you not know I have authority to release you and I have authority to crucify you? Jesus accepts that truth. He says, you would have no authority over me unless it's been given you from above. For this reason he who delivered me up to you has the greater sin. By the he means Caiaphas. And our writer has made it crystal clear. Caiaphas is the man driving for that all the way through. So this is an important issue now. He's saying, I admit you have authority to crucify me or release me. I get that. And furthermore, it's right. You should have it. You should have it. You are the authorised power here. And it comes from God. And if it were not given, you wouldn't have it. So he's actually saying to Pilate, I acknowledge your authority, and I recognise you can do whichever you will, but you need to know you wouldn't have that authority unless given. Now, however Pilate understands that, if he thinks it comes fundamentally from the emperor, and every procurator in a forward region would understand the emperor has authorised him, perhaps he understands the emperor is what Jesus means. We, the readers, understand what Jesus means because there is an authority given to government by the gift of God to punish sin and to sustain order in a fallen, wicked world. Yes, but can it be demonised? Can it become a state which is really a pseudo-church? Can it become a state which thinks it is a state under its own authority, running totalitarianly wise itself? Yes, it can. And this is the place we now watch. He says, as a result of this, Pilate made efforts to release him. But the Jews cried out all more, if you release this man, you're no friend of Caesar. They're now playing to the authority back of him. And Jesus has mentioned that, but not that Jesus meant that, but that Pilate would have had to understand that. And the Jews say, if you don't release him, you're not a friend of Caesar. Why? Because we're back to the king of the Jews thing again. We've lost the Son of God business, that's gone. What we're interested in is, he's a Jew, and he says he's a king, and he's opposed to Rome. And if you let him go free, you are not a friend of Caesar. Who authorised you? Everyone who makes himself out to be a king opposes Caesar. Pilate therefore can't afford to support such sedition. He can't afford that, because now the Jews are pushing back. What they're saying is, we've got a political edge, we've got a spin to make here. We can make a political spin. We brought a man to Pilate and he wouldn't convict him, and furthermore he said he was a king of the Jews and he did nothing about it, and he's no friend of his Caesar. Oh, we can make that song. We can sing that song anywhere, all the way back to Rome if you like. And Pilate therefore heard these words. He brought Jesus out, and he sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Meaning, when the procurator walks out and sits down on the seat, we're about to give a sentence. We're about to say something decisive. It was the day of the preparation for the Passover. It was about the 6th hour. He said to the Jews, "Behold your king," still mocking, still making his politics coming. And they said, away with him, crucify him. He said, "Shall I crucify your king? Hello?" And the chief priest said, "We have no king but Caesar." So then, he delivered him to them to be crucified. Now Rome will do the crucifying, but he's been delivered by Pilate to them. Now we have an astonishing thing here. We have a pagan procurator who is now delivered back to the Jews, their king, to be crucified for them. That is to say, he has now joined himself with the Jewish theme. So in doing that, he takes responsibility to live and work in solidarity with the Jews, which is precisely what God intended, that Jew and Gentile would be one. And this man has begun the game because he stood with solidarity of the Jews in the sense of saying, "I will give him back to you, I will release him to you." He calls that a release. It's a handing over, but of course it's a handing over to them. So what he's doing is he's saying, I'm not responsible for the death of this man in the sense that Rome judged him, had a trial, found him guilty, and then crucified him. That's not how it went. I gave him back to you because you're so keen to crucify him. You can do that. So now we learn this is not a good judgment, is it? This is not good practice. This is very not good due process. This is Roman justice, God's gift to them, because they're now the authorities, and they don't practice it well. This is demonised. This is where the state has become essentially a tyrant, not a carer of the good order of the universe. And so what we have here is something where the state lets us down here. If we look for Pilate to say, he'll do it right. Well, he didn't. He tried hard, and you'll notice John's way of telling you this is, all the way through this exchange, he insists as a reader, you know Pilate wished to release him. But politically, he was outmanoeuvred and he gave in. And he was manipulated on the grounds of Caesar. They took Jesus, therefore, and he went out bearing his own cross to a place of a skull, called in Hebrew Golgotha, and there they crucified him, and with him 2 other men. We hear of them, but not before we've heard about Barabbas. On either side, and Jesus in between, and Pilate wrote an inscription also and put it on the cross, and it was written, Jesus the Nazarene, the King of the Jews. We're back to the theme. He's insisting. What's this man's crime? He's the King of the Jews. Well, why would you kill a King of the Jews? Well, we're Romans, aren't we? It's an insurrectionist. That would be the implication, but it's not said. It's not so said. It is simply said. And that's why the Jews said, don't write that. He's not the King of the Jews. He said he was. He said, what I've written, meaning, don't push me. So that anybody watching this man dying on a cross would have said, what's the charge? In Latin and Aramaic and Greek. He's the King of the Jews. What would be the question you would ask? Why would Rome kill a man who's the King of the Jews? And if you said, where's his army? Where was the insurrection? What did he do? You could imagine 2 people saying, what? If he's the King of the Jews, we didn't know that. No one's ever said that. Where are his army? What? In other words, there isn't an insurrection, and if Rome is calling that one, it isn't one, and then why would you kill a man who's the King of the Jews? Well, John has left us without any doubt in the slightest. The Jews killed the King of the Jews, and the Romans acceded to it without due process, all the while saying he's justified. So here we have an amazing thing. A man who is justified and yet dies, and we have a man who is known to be justified by the governing authority, and it simply hands him over for political, because they're politically screwed, really. They've caught him. They've caught him on a hook that they can tell a story if he doesn't. So he did. Pilate would not change what he wrote. And of course, John makes that absolutely poignant to us. Of course he wouldn't, because it's true. What Pilate wrote was true. The man who's telling the truth here is the man who is manipulated and weak and gives in. But what he writes is true. He vindicates him. The soldiers, therefore, when they crucified him, took his outer garments, which is, of course, the seamed garment of a tunic, which is woven so you don't cut it. And they threw lots for it, and we know that that's to do with Scripture. And they said, let's not tear it, we'll cast lots. And they divided my outer garments among them, and my clothing they cast lots, as the Psalm 22 says they would. And the soldiers did this, but there was standing at the cross of Jesus his mother and his mother's sister Mary, and the wife of Clopas and Mary Magdalene. And when Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said, "Son, your mother." And so he gave his mum into the hands of, because he's the eldest son, you appreciate. He's head of the house. He's the ruler. And so he hands his mum to John. He said to his disciple, "Behold your mother," and that hour the disciple took her into his own household. Here he is caring for his mother, and we understand that these ladies are witnessing this, and the only witness and the only man we've got there at the moment is John, the disciple whom he loved. We don't have any of the other men noted here, and it would be in his interest to note them, but he doesn't. And after this, knowing all the things that had already been accomplished, Jesus said, "I'm thirsty," and a jar full of sour wine was standing there. So they put a sponge and they filled it and put it to his mouth. And when he had said that, he'd received the sour wine, he said, "It's finished." And he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. I don't know whether you've thought about that a great deal, but it's a very important issue. Here is a man who dies because he dies when he wills. And this is a very important thing to understand, because if you see it, you begin to see what is happening here. I'm just looking for a quotation from Augustine, which is superb. And the thing that's important to understand about this is that here is a man who dies when he says he will. He lays down his life. It is not taken from him. See, it's important to recognise when you put a man on a cross, you put him there to die, but that doesn't mean he dies because you took his life from him. It usually does, but in this case it does not. Listen to Augustine, De Trinitate, Book 4. Yeah? He yielded up his spirit, which is the death of his body. If your spirit leaves, your body dies. The spirit is preferred to the body, says Augustine. The death of the spirit means God has left it. The death of the body means the spirit has left it. Therefore, the punishment of the death of the body lies in that the spirit leaves the body against the spirit's will, because it left God willingly. That's for the wicked man, isn't it? All sinners find their spirit leaves their body against their will. People hang on to their life when they're dying. Or if they're not, in these days, they're confused for reasons that they think something else will happen. Augustine's point is, since the spirit left God because it would, it therefore leaves the body because it would not, unless suicide, which is the spirit doing violence to itself, and so therefore the death of the body. Here's his point. The spirit of the mediator shows it was not through punishment of sin that he came to death of his flesh, because the spirit did not leave unwillingly, but because he willed, when he willed, and as he willed. What does this mean? His life was not taken from him, and his spirit had to leave. He gave up his spirit, which is to say he laid down his life. It was not taken from him unwillingly by influenza or some other thing, or from death on a cross either. He willed when he would die. He said, "It's finished." He said, bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Therefore his body died. Augustine's point is, this is the most extraordinary thing, most unlike the death that normally happens to sinners. Mark has a Roman soldier at the end of the 15th chapter saying, "Oh, surely this man was the Son of God," because he saw that. And every Roman soldier's watched hundreds of thousands of people screw around on a cross and die a most agonising death and hang on to the end. And at the end it's taken from them just because they can't bear it any longer. This man gives it away and his body dies. And a Roman soldier says, "That's weird. That's really unusual. This man is the Son of God." That's how Mark puts it. John wants you to understand the cup's finished. It's done. The Jews, therefore, because it was a day of preparation, saw their bodies would not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, so they broke the legs, which of course it hastens the death because a man can't push back up. And so in this case, but they came to do Jesus' legs, he was already dead. They saw he was already dead, they didn't break his legs, but there was a soldier who perhaps thought he'd better make it pretty sure because it's his life if he doesn't, so he drives a spear up through his pleural cavity, and out comes water and blood, which for John are highly decisive expressions. We'll come to that. Because the blood is the symbol you appreciate of natural life, and especially of the sacrificed one. The water is, of course, the symbol of the spiritual life, which will be claimed to us by the Spirit. We've had water driven through us all the way through this gospel as a statement of the Holy Spirit. And this is an important issue because the shedding of Jesus' life releases his life to us, and it releases his Spirit to us. But of course, John doesn't want that. He wants it to be known as a telling of the truth that you may believe. Not a bone shall be broken, and they shall look upon him whom they pierced. So he says, the Old Testament saw that picture, and he's just seen it there, done. And so in this case, after these things, who should turn up but two highly connected men, Joseph of Arimathea from the Sanhedrin and Nicodemus, and they've come with tons of stuff to embalm his body, but there's not too much time, so they do a fast job and put him into a tomb and close the door. On the next chapter of only 11 verses, Mary Magdalene comes and the thing is opened, and she says, "Whoa, look at that." And she understands that she stands outside the tomb and she weeps, and she wept, and she stopped looking into the tomb, but she saw two angels sitting there, one at the head and the feet, the body of Jesus lying there, and they said, "Why are you weeping?" And she said, "Well, because they've taken away my Lord, and I don't know where they've taken him from, where they've laid him." And then she said that, she turned around and Jesus was standing there, but she didn't know it was him. Time and again you discover that people see Jesus like this, as a resurrected body, and it's withheld from them. He can withhold it. Do you remember he did it for the men on the Emmaus Road? He reveals it by something else which gospel truth would understand. And in that case, the breaking of the bread. Here, it's a voice. He says, "Mary." She gets it. She understands who it is because she knows the voice, which doesn't change, I take it. But what's important to see here is that she wants to give him a hug. He says, "Don't do that. You're never going to know me that way again. I haven't ascended to my Father yet, but I don't want you to do that. We're not living in this way. You're not knowing me after the flesh ever before. This is a new thing, a new day." Can he allow Thomas to stick his fingers in his wounds? Yeah, he does. Is he upset with that idea? But he's not going to have Mary do that. He seems to be saying, I don't do that, don't hold me. Stop clinging to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father, but go to my brothers and say, I ascend to my Father and your Father. He does not say our Father, because he is a son. In a way they are not, but they are true sons because of through him. And so the doors are shut, he tells them, "Shalom." And they see peace with you, and he showed them his hands and his side. Now this is an important thing in this gospel, because it's teaching us that there were historical witnesses who saw these things. Later we shall see, because I'm moving quickly to get through that, later we shall see that Thomas is not at all happy unless he sees it, feels it himself. He wants to see the verifiable data. And Jesus allows him that, but then says, "Blessed are the people who don't need this," which are the people who could not have it. You and I have never had it. We haven't stuck our fingers in and felt the wounds, because we are those who come according to the word of the witnesses apostolic later. And we're blessed for that. Notice that? We're blessed because we don't have what Thomas had. What do you make of that? Lots of people today would crave to walk where Jesus walked. They'll go to Israel and do it. They will try and pull him back into the flesh, walk where he walked, see the stuff. I don't say everyone who does that does it for that reason, but plenty do. And it's important to understand they're mistaken, deeply mistaken, because this is the thing that Jesus says, the blessing is to believe it because of the apostolic witness.